I'm going to switch off our mobile phones, guys. Morning, colleagues, and welcome to the Referendum Bill Committee, our 7th meeting, discussing today the Franchise Bill. And first of all, can I just recognise that Stuart Maxwell has given his apologies for today, and we have Bill Kidd in his place. First item on the agenda is obviously the Franchise Bill, oral evidence on that bill. It's now formally been referred to the committee as the lead committee, as you might expect, by the Bureau. The Subordinate Legislation Committee has also reported on the delegated powers in Section 11 of the bill and raised no concerns about those powers or about the level of parliamentary control opposed, just to update colleagues. Welcome to the first panel, gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming along to the Scottish Parliament this morning to give evidence. This morning we've got John McCormick, the Electoral Commissioner for Scotland, Andrew Scanlon, who is the Director of the Electoral Administration, and Andy O'Neill, who is the Head of Office in Scotland. So, welcome. And John McCormick, I believe you want to make a brief opening statement.
Yes, and I will be brief, Convener. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to meet you this morning. The Electoral Commission recognises that questions about the franchise and who can vote are rightly matters for Parliament to decide. Our priorities are to help ensure that the electoral registers are secure and accurate, and to ensure that there are no barriers to participation for electors. And in this regard, we welcome the clarity of the policy memorandum and the draft bill, which seeks to ensure that all 16, 17-year-olds will be able to vote. And we look forward to working with Scottish Government officials and this committee as the legislation is developed in the interests of voters. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that brief introduction, John. James Kelly, I was going to come to you first, issues about voter registration.
Okay, thank you, Convener, and good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for attending and giving us the benefit of, no doubt, of your expertise in this area. I think it goes without saying that if we want to get participation from 16 and 17-year-olds in the referendum, first and foremost, we need to get them registered. Therefore, I'd be interested in your overview of what additional activities you see as being necessary to ensure that we maximise registration of 16 and 17-year-olds in addition to the normal activities that you undertake in relation to electoral registration.
Well, just as a headline for me at the beginning, Convener, as Mr Kelly noted, trying to encourage people to register for an election or a referendum is one of our key priorities leading up to the event itself. And we've been going through all our details and plans in relation to what we do at every campaign, and of course we're refreshing them for every referendum because every referendum is different. And this one uniquely having 16 and 17-year-olds to vote for the first time. So we have a range of approaches to that. I'll maybe ask my colleague Andy O'Neill to go into some of the detail, and then we can wrap up briefly at the end.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think it's fair to say that we're at the beginning of thinking in terms of how we address the problem, the issue particularly of how we ensure all 15 through to 17-year-olds are registered. It forms a part, a wider public awareness activity which we assume will be given in the main referendum bill once that's published. We're developing our plans at the moment. We've costed some of the plans to inform Scottish Government's financial memorandum. I think our main objectives of our plan will be around ensuring that everyone who can register is registered, ensuring all electors understand the date when of the poll, providing information on proxy voting, postal voting, and how to complete the ballot paper. What we think at the moment, we will have an awareness campaign which will be based around a leaflet or a booklet which will be delivered to all households. No concepts or anything like that have been tested at the moment, of course, but we will, once we get to that point, test it extensively with the Scottish public, and specifically including 15 and 17-year-olds, to make sure it's clear, impartial, and covers all the topics necessary. I think it's kind of two phases, and if you imagine the awareness campaign would be similar to the 2012 local government council election campaign or the 2011 Scottish Parliament campaign, where we'll do a lot of registration followed by the booklet and pushing people towards the booklet. Obviously, the booklet would be delivered to all households. We'd make it available to councils and other people so they can put it in their public points. We envisage using TV, radio, paid for advertisements in newspapers, some posters, online activity, and I think this would be interesting when people who have never voted, and that will be the majority of 15, 16, 17-year-olds, understanding what happens in a polling place. We have in the past used computer. We put them on YouTube. What happens in polling places? Viral things such as Ballot Box Man, which is a registration thing we used in the past. Which, if you want to see, is on YouTube. And obviously, we'd do lots of media work. I think you're right. To address specifically the exact question, it is a main challenge to try and achieve registration of all 15 through 17-year-olds. It's the first time we've ever done this. We want to ensure there's no potential confusion. What we want to do is ensure that we work with everyone who's appropriate to work with to ensure that 15 and 17-year-olds do get registered. We have already started talking to ADES, the Directors of Education in Scotland, Bruce Robertson, who's coming to talk to you later in the day. We've made contact with Education Scotland. We have in the past worked with NUS Scotland, Scottish Youth Parliament, Young Scot, all these people, and we're mapping out who we need to work with and how we can work with them. And we read with interest the evidence which you took last week from some of those people. And I think there was lots of good ideas there, and we can try and work with them if appropriate. In an essence, that's probably all I would like to say in introduction. Obviously, try and answer questions if you want to.
We have a very well established relationship with the communications specialists in each of the local authorities, a communications network, and through working in partnership with the Electoral Management Board and the communications network, we target specific events for the local population, and there we're looking for particular advice on ways where locally you can get in touch with people who are 15, 16, 17, to target them about registration and about the date of the referendum itself. So it works locally, it works nationally, and it works virally through the electronic media at our disposal.
Okay, if I can just pick up on Mr O'Neill's contribution, I'm obviously encouraged by the fact that you've already been talking to some of the relevant parties in relation to 16 and 17-year-olds, and you looked at the evidence last week, which I think gave some excellent pointers. But correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed that in relation to developing publicity and ideas around getting people registered, your main drive was to, and I'm not against that, your main drive was to look at registration in general and hope that 16 and 17-year-olds would be pulled along in that drive. What I wasn't getting was what specific publicity and initiatives were you going to target at 16 and 17-year-olds?
Apologies if I've given you that impression. But I think we have to ensure that everyone who can register is registered. What we're trying to do is build on what we've normally done. We've never tried to engage with 15 through to 16-year-olds. It's too early to say what works, what doesn't work. What we're trying to do at the moment is map out who we need to work with, organisations, individuals, the type of activity which does work with younger people. We're guessing a lot of it might be web-based, internet-based, but at the moment we haven't got any definite plans. What we're trying to do is ensure that whatever is necessary is done.
But are you going to? Is it your intention to devise plans that will specifically target this new group of voters, as you say, 15 through to 17? So that's something that you're going to be working on.
Yes.
Right.
But we generally are also aware, convener, from our experience in different elections and referendums in the past, about the low turnout between 18 and 25-year-olds. So there's an overlap between them as well. But we have certain advantages with the 16, 17-year-olds because they can be targeted in a particular way. But there's also an issue about young people in general, which I know that.
Okay, one other issue that I wanted to pick up on that was raised last week related to student voters and student registration. The example given was we expect, we'll know later today, we expect that the date is going to be autumn 2014, and a lot of first-year students who may be 16 or 17-year-old will be participating in their first vote. They may have registered at their home address but moved to a student location, and that presents challenges in terms of ensuring that they get to vote at their new location. And you know, some of the evidence we heard was around the issues about rolling registration and being able to sign up, you know, student locations en masse. Have you given any consideration to those issues?
I think, and I think just to supplement the answers that Andy gave earlier, I think it's important to bear in mind that the activity we will do will be phased over a long period. There's clearly the household activity that will start alongside the normal household canvas, so that young people will be on the will be added on the form that's in the regulations at the moment. So that activity, and then there is rolling registration. So it's a long time issue. It's not as though it's a snapshot in time or a very narrow window to influence this. It can be a long build campaign. In terms of students, you're quite right. The students can be registered at their home address or at their term time address, and they do have a choice about where to go. They don't have to be registered in both locations. There will be, once the date is known, we will then look at the strategies that we can work with the electoral registration officers and with university authorities and with the National Union of Students Scotland to make sure that they understand the options that are available to them.
Under Fabian.
It was just a quick query, thank you very much, about trying to encourage and enthuse young people, and I take the point from Mr McCormick up to the age of 25, you know, whether there's room in your organisation for perhaps seconding from other organisations that have a level of expertise in this.
Well, we've got a good track record of working in partnership with others. If there was an opportunity for someone to be seconded, we certainly wouldn't be against that. But what we've worked on before is building a partnership and working with a partnership. And I noticed one of your previous witnesses talked about a coalition of interest, you know, and we were told to be part of that coalition and working together. But whatever was the best, we're open to whatever is the best way of sharing experience, pooling that experience, and then working together to make sure that all 16 and 17-year-olds and young voters are registered, know how to vote, and participate in the referendum. That would be our priority, and working together in whichever way is the most effective way to do that.
That just a wee bit further, John. In terms of the resources available to the Electoral Commission, what resource do you have to deliver an effective social media campaign within the organisation? And will that require to be brought in from somewhere else, or do you have that resource strong enough in-house?
We have that resource at the moment. We've had quite successful campaigns targeted at young people for previous elections, and I used to be able to give you the number of hits that came for our different voting animations, etc. You know, so and I noticed in I could send those afterwards when I can't just recall them at this hour in the morning. Pardon? But we also noticed in some of your previous witnesses talking about examples where they've used DVDs and viral information, and certainly we can learn from them. But we've got a lot of experience and a very experienced website team who have developed animations that have been tried and tested in elections and have worked, and would like to retest them and update them and customise them for this referendum. So we have that within our existing resources, Convener.
Social media goes a bit deeper than that, though, in terms of just how, you know, web-based issues is. You know, how we get best use of Facebook, best use of Twitter, and there are companies out there who can, you know, multiply up hugely the numbers of not hits, but the number of tweets you can get. So I just wonder whether or not you've got there may be a need for you to look a bit deeper in terms of that particular area of activity.
We are engaging a social media agency to advise us on all of this stuff as part of the wider public awareness, and obviously 15 through to 17-year-olds will be a major part of that. I mean, the Commission itself has, in its 12 years brief history, for a long period of time it did outreach work, and we've got expertise there. There are people like me who've been there all that 12 years. And we've done things like, I mean, we worked with Facebook in the UK parliamentary general election in 2010, where on a certain weekend, if you went into Facebook, our registration page came up from About My Vote, so we've done that in the past. The Ballot Box Man viral, which was trying to get people to pass it on to each other. I don't do Twitter, so I'm sorry. How many
followers you had to see to prove it? But
Not very many, sadly. But, you know, that sort of thing where it was specifically a registration message, which was essentially, if you watch it on YouTube, which I actually have done, it's a ballot box which bursts into life and runs away from someone in a polling station because they aren't registered. So that's that kind of level. But we obviously will be looking to our agency to advise us more professionally than anything I might come up personally with.
You'd be relieved to hear. You can see that. Patricia.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. I have a more general question I'd like to ask, but could I come back to the question that James Kelly posed to Mr Scallon? We could have a situation where a first year, or a student in any year for that matter really, had registered at their home address and found themselves at university. We don't know yet the date of the referendum, but we do know it will be autumn. But there could be situations where that student has passed the date at which they could get a postal or a proxy vote before they really realise that that's the situation. Now, if it's someone who lives in Cambuslang and goes to Glasgow University, you don't have a problem. But if it's someone that lives in Glasgow and goes to St Andrews University, then it's unlikely they'll return home to vote. So I just wondered if you're thinking of how you would capture that particular, perhaps small, but we don't know yet, group of people who might, through no fault of their own, find themselves disadvantaged.
All our publicity will be about registering and then the options that are available to people. So the timelines around the referendum, we're assuming will be very much as they are around every other electoral event. There will be everyone will know what the timeline is to get applications in, to think about their position. So the publicity will be will gear towards those dates, and people will be left in no doubt. I mean, 11 days before the referendum day, it feels to me that everybody will know this event is taking place. What the messages we will be putting out will be making clear that everyone understands the deadlines, the opportunities to apply for a postal vote, the opportunities to apply to proxy, the opportunities to register. All of those will be part of the message. It's not simply about registration, it's about how people participate in the event.
And if I could just add, it's also about targeting messages to key small groups. So we could, I mean, in that instance, which is quite an interesting example, you could work with the universities or the student associations to ensure that people who are coming from parts of Scotland where they do have a vote to a further away place actually are aware of that, so they make arrangements beforehand, so they apply for a postal vote or a proxy vote 11 days beforehand, so it doesn't actually happen. So it's just a matter of identifying the issue, coming up with a solution, action in it.
I think that would be very helpful, because, you know, if it's your first time at university, you've got lots of other things in your head, never mind a referendum, no matter how important. But my more general question was, Mr O'Neill mentioned in his earlier contribution that you're really at the beginning of a process here. But I would ask whether you think you actually have enough time. You know, we're making efforts to get this bill through the Parliament by June, the end of June, so that electoral registration officers can do their canvass in the autumn, which isn't a lot of time really to get the registration part, or at least for the household registration part of the work done, the campaigns around that. Now, we don't yet know how many 16 and 17-year-olds will be picked up as part of the household registration or as part of the sort of rolling register. But I would imagine that most people generally register as part of the household. So I just would be looking to be reassured that you think you do have enough time in order to be able to do that job.
I mean, at the moment, we've got no concern. It's, you know, putting together plans takes some time, but actually commissioning work, we've experience of doing that at short notice. So at the moment, we've got no concerns about the time. We've got more time for this event than we've had for some others.
We've already started talking to our agency who we employ, briefing them on the whole referendum in Scotland in general. So we are actually probably ahead of the game than we normally are in terms of public awareness campaigns.
If I might just come back on the household canvass versus enrolling registration. The household canvass, that letters through the box and people knocking on the door, has consistently proved to be the most effective way of getting information.
Thank you.
Stuart Mamil, I think you're supplementary to this area as well.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Just to Andy O'Neill from his comments earlier on, I didn't hear SDS actually mentioned in terms of working with younger people, particularly those who are doing apprenticeships. Is that something that's been factored in?
On the list, I failed to mention it in my remarks. Apologies.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. I've got another one, if that's okay, Convener.
Related this area?
It is, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Just it's regarding the issue of first-year students once again. Would your preference be to actually to use the terminology from last week to register people en bloc, people who travel from and study out and away from their home, or to actually give them the option to inform them of their options, and to then give them some other information to then allow them to actually make their choice as to whether they actually want to register in their halls or maintain their registration at their home? What would your preference be?
I don't think we've got a preference. I think it depends on the nature of the institution in which the students are based, and it will depend on the nature of the student population as well. I mean, clearly the eligibility for registration is to an individual, and any block registration would need to be based on the accurate information that is needed to make sure that people are entitled to be on the register. I don't think we have a preference, and it will depend on the nature and scale and size of the accommodation.
But we are aware of the issue that in Scotland it's there are fewer than in the UK as a whole. Fewer students are in halls of residence which can have the block registration, you know, so we only catch a certain amount through that. So we're very aware of that and looking at the variety of options to us to get people to register.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Annabel Goldie.
Specifically, Mr McCormick, and good morning. Talking about advertising, disseminating information, what is your budget figure for doing all that? Does it include TV advertising?
Yes, it does. Mr O'Neill's probably got the figure to hand, but we have, in our discussions with the officers of the government, I mean, we're satisfied we'll have sufficient resources. We've put in an application about the funding that would be required for the kind of multimedia campaign, which we've planned to be slightly in excess of what we had for the Scottish Parliament campaign, which was regarded as successful. And Andy has given me the figure of £1.8 million. So we're satisfied with the resources that have been allocated. We've requested, we've given in a very clear, detailed budget of what we think we require. And we're satisfied we'll have the available resources, and it does include its multimedia, press and radio and television, as well as individual booklets, etc.
I'm just maybe I've missed in whether it was mentioned already, but I'm just wondering about work that you may be doing with local authorities in terms of looked after young people, people who are in care situations or similar other situations, and whether they are a group which has been picked up in terms of the work that you might do to raise awareness and ensure that they get their opportunity to vote.
It's not something we've done to date in Scotland, but it's something we're looking at. I read when that came up in the evidence last week, and it made me think about work we've done with the Care Commission and Human Rights Commission in terms of making, helping people understand who work in care homes how to help people fill in postal votes. And I saw similarities with that, and if we could provide guidance which could then be fed out via the councils and the various establishments, we could do that. Again, it's just another, for me, it's another issue of identifying the issue, the problem, coming up with a solution and action in it. And if we have to work with various different partners we've never worked with before, we can do that.
Thank you very much for that.
We're also aware, Convener, that not every potential 16 or 17-year-old voter can be targeted through an apprentice scheme, through Skills Development Scotland or through education, and we're just beginning to think clearly how we might get those who are very difficult to access in that age range, and we'll be trying to come up with some solutions there and some proposals there as well.
Before I move on to Tavish Scott and wider participation issues, can I ask just one specific question on another registration issue, particularly in regard to the Register of Young Voters and the forum which is in the bill at Schedule 2. What's your view on it in its present state and where it is? Is it satisfactory, that form at Schedule 2, if you've had a chance to look at it? And is it suitable for the annual canvass and the rolling registration process?
The form is subject to user testing, so I think we're waiting the outcome of that before it's finalised. And you know, we've got no reason to think the user testing won't be thorough. It is some basic information is being asked for, and it follows the lines that other forms have been used. So when we see the final version, we'll comment on it. But at the moment, we think there's a good process being gone through to test its usability.
Okay. Stuart's got a question on that, and then I'll come supplementary. Then I'll come to Tavish. Scott.
Thank you once again, Convener. Just a minute, on the issue of the forum, I was speaking to a former member of the Youth Parliament last Friday, and I posed a question to him regarding the forum, certainly for the 15-year-olds to register. And I suggested to him, do you think it would be useful if that form were to be maybe a different colour as compared to the one for the normal household registration, just to make it clear that actually this form is purely for 15-year-olds to register. And that individual, he thought actually it might be something certainly to consider, and didn't rule it out.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Certainly, I think something we could take along. It may help in the messaging that we would want to be putting out.
I mean, one guesses, as in the testing, presumably they're giving it. I mean, we're not involved in the testing. They would be giving it to people in an interview situation as they would receive it. So presumably it's in an envelope with two forms. They could try same colour, try different colours, and find out what happens.
I was thinking, when I spoke to the individual about it, I also gave the example of past elections for the Scottish Parliament, where there have been different colours of ballot papers, and there was a clear message to people when they actually went in to vote. So I thought it was something worth considering.
And that's why we're so supportive of the testing, and delighted it's there in the bill, so we can all contribute to that. Sure. Thank you.
Okay, Tavish.
Thank you very much, Convener. Can I just say how envious I am of having £1.8 million to spend in an election campaign? There we are. Since that was a useful figure you gave, Mr McCormack, would you be able to therefore split out the separation of the budget between the registration of young people, and I take all the points you made earlier on, to the participation and involvement in the actual why you should vote bit of it? Is there now a clear judgment about how money should be spent on those two aspects of your work?
We have to write to you about this in terms of our understanding and the way the budget was built up in detail. We don't have the figures and the build-up, but we could write to you, Convener, in relation to that.
It would be difficult to achieve because, to use an analogy with party, at some point for the leaflet you'd have to apportion what was registration messages and what was how to vote and what was proxy voting messages. So it is quite difficult to achieve, but we could try and give you some sort of broad figure within it.
Saying there is a second stage. There's the stage that is asking and helping young people through the process of registering and making sure they are all registered, as opposed to then going on to encourage them to vote.
I mean, as usual, sorry, I may not have made it clear that there'll be a registration phase, and then as the leaflet and all the other activities about the date and such goes on stream, you move towards that. But I mean, obviously, well out before, if you're not registered, you can't vote, so you've got to emphasise the registration messages.
Yeah, and in your earlier answer to James Kelly, in your description of all the mechanisms the Electoral Commission planned to use, were you describing there how you were going to encourage people to register to vote? And therefore, my question is, what then happens after that? Are you planning again to use all those mechanisms again for the second stage in this process?
Obviously, we haven't planned it out in detail. We're some 18 months or so away from the event, assuming whatever the date it is. Yeah. I mean, generally it works a long way out. It's all registration. As you get nearer to the event, you emphasise postal vote deadlines, registration deadlines, and then in the past, in 2011, 2012, we've emphasised the date and how to fill in the ballot paper. And you would expect something similar.
Yeah. Thank you. And just on Mr McCormack's earlier point about the challenge of young people from 18 to 25 voting in referenda, what is the Electoral Commission's experience of what worked and what didn't work in the referenda, not the election campaigns, but in referenda that we've had? I appreciate we haven't had just too many of them, but in the few that we have had, are there any lessons that we have learned?
The Facebook, YouTube, the viral, the website animations, we were particularly gratified by the number of the usage of that, the access of that, and that's something we'll be looking at again here in relation to 16 to 25s. But it's not very, in broadly, I know the access was much greater than the targets we'd set ourselves.
And no, thank you. And do we know from previous referenda, was analysis done as to the percentage of 18 to 25s who did vote in previous referendums? Do we have any breakdown on that?
We don't go through the registers, and because you can't check through the registers, so we get those sort of figures from public opinion research, and we can happily make that available to the committee and let you understand. But that is reported voting,
yes,
rather than in any way checking, because obviously we can't do that.
I appreciate you can't check, no, but in terms of the analysis you did after those referenda, did you find some way to correlate the work you had done targeted on that particular age group and how successful it had been, is I guess what I'm...
The questions after any event are, did people or didn't they vote? How did they know about the event? How did they get the messaging? It's a sort of fairly standard approach to access. I can't remember the details, but we will have it, and we're happy to supply it to the committee.
Well, that'd be great if you could share it. And finally, on schools, have you given any thought to, again, in the second stage, this is not registration, but this is on participation. Have you given any thought as yet to what is appropriate in schools, given that is obviously a mechanism by which one can ensure information is provided to people of that age, and in light and also of Tam Bailey, the Children's Commissioner's evidence to the committee last week?
Well, in general, it falls under the category we said at the outset, Convener, about working with our partners who are specialists in this area, and we're the Association of Directors of Education and School Leaders Scotland have already made statements about what they would expect working in schools with head teachers and local authorities working together to ensure that the situation was managed appropriately and that the information that was in is in the control of the educationists and that the educationists approve the access to the schools. So we've already opened discussions with the association, and we'll be working with others to keep us informed as to the issues that arise and how we can help and assist in preparing materials. But we would do it through the educational specialist.
Okay, thank you very much.
And I'll come back to and we'll go there later. She wants us to come back to canvas issues, but let me go through some of the participation issues and turnout for stuff first. Annabelle. Patricia? Sorry, Patrick.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Just to follow up on the 2 points that Tavish Scott was discussing there. First of all, on evidence on how we know what activities actually work to increase turnout, not just to increase awareness, but to actually have an effect on whether people vote. I mean, I used to work in public health, and we had the same difficulty. How do you know whether the activities that you undertook actually had an effect, or whether what's happening in public health terms or behavioural change is affected by a whole host of other factors you can't actually measure? Is there any academic evidence that you can draw from other jurisdictions, particularly around how to engage with younger voters and what actually works, what actually has an effect to increase turnout? We heard from Jersey and Guernsey, which had talked about very different experiences of how they engaged with those young voters and what kind of turnout levels they've got. Those are fairly small jurisdictions, of course. Is there any international academic evidence that you can draw from that informs the design of your campaign based on, who knows what works?
My colleagues are aware of some international. I'm reminded of the health warning that they say about all advertising and communications activity that only 50% of it works, but you don't know what 50% and works. And we're also very clear in the Commission, and we do this every time, that every event is different, so every referendum is different. So you can take some of the messages from a previous referendum, but you've also got to devise unique messaging, unique approaches and bespoke approaches for this specific referendum. So we're trying to do that as well. But international evidence, Andrew?
Yeah. I mean, there is international evidence, but I think one of the things about the international evidence is it's very rarely that there is something that is simply transferable to another jurisdiction. We work very closely with the electoral commissions in Canada, New Zealand and Australia to look at best practice, and there will be their activity will influence how we design our process, but there's no silver bullet to this issue of turnout. What we will do, though, is do everything we can to make sure that people understand the options available to them to participate, which is about making sure they're on the register and understanding the channels they have to vote.
Have you thought about engaging or even recruiting on a voluntary basis, perhaps, young people themselves to advise you? 15, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, to give you direct advice about what they think will work?
Well, as I said at the outset, we really are open to working with everybody who can help us, and having reading the evidence of the committee, have looked at Young Scot, for example, and their access to young people. So I think probably, although we are open to working directly with young people, the young people who are already working through other agencies will benefit from their experience and their knowledge. But and we're looking forward to building those relationships over the next few months.
And finally, just the issues that also that Tavish Scott raised about schools. John McCormack talked about wanting to be sure that everything is that the activities in schools are appropriately managed, I think was the phrase. But have you reached a view yet about what that actually means in practice? We're going to see this opportunity to use the fact that the vast majority of this young cohort of voters will be in some form of education. But it's not an opportunity that's simply going to materialise unless it's actually exploited properly, appropriately, and with the opportunity for young people to be exposed to the arguments in a neutral and a managed way, but also young people wanting to express their own point of view. For example, I think probably most people would agree that having the campaign groups themselves in advocating, campaigning, lobbying, proselytising in schools would be inappropriate. But if young people have their own views and are wearing the badges or the T-shirts or giving their friends a leaflet, is that appropriate? Have you reached a view yet about what level of activity is going to fall within this term appropriately managed?
No, we haven't, and I think it might be inappropriate for us to do so. Because we will work with the educationists, the local authorities delivering the education service in the schools and responsible for it, and the head teachers who are responsible to the local authorities, and the education advisors they have around them from Education Scotland, Association of Directors, and their own unions and specialist associations. Those are the ones to make those judgments, and we'd be happy to advise them on where we think we have any expertise to give in that area relating to the referendum. But I think it's those judgments are rightly in the hands of the educationists who are responsible.
Thank you.
I think, Rob, you've got one question in this area, then I'm going to come back to Will Goldie.
Thank you, Convener. Morning, panel. Issue about the languages that you use to spread your message. You talked about the bespoke nature of this referendum. Would that change the languages you use in your literature?
Yes, is the short answer. What we do with all of our awareness campaigns is employ a PR agency. In this case, we will also have a social media PR agency advising us. We'll obviously take ideas if young people come up with ideas and give them to us. We'd obviously take them on board and think about them. We're obviously prepared to work with anyone who has a good idea. But what we do with all of our ideas once we've got them is test them. And as part of the testing, we'll obviously test them on the whole of Scottish society, but specifically in this case for all the messages and the things we're going to try and do for 15 through to 17-year-olds, they will be tested with that age group. So I guess the language will change and be suited to that age group.
So, for example, Scotland's other official language, Gaelic, would be included, and other minority ethnic languages as well in your materials.
Yeah, we've done all those languages in the past, and I would imagine we will be doing similar in the future.
Okay, thank you very much, Annabelle, and then we're going to come to Annabelle Ewing, I think, wanted a question as well.
Convener, thank you very much. It's specifically following the question which you asked relative to Schedule 2, the canvass form. The Act, or the Bill rather, at Section 7.2c, specifically provides for non-disclosure of a young person's address, but the canvass form makes no reaffirmation of the facility of non-disclosure of that address. Is that an element which the Commission will specifically look at in its testing of the form?
The Commission isn't testing the form that's being done by the Scottish Government. I think what we will do when we see the form again is have regard to that issue.
Convener, and good morning, gentlemen. It was an issue that I had seen raised in the House of Commons Scottish Affairs Committee this week, and it concerns the registration entitlement of service personnel. And my understanding is that, dating back to the 1983 Representation of People Act, that service personnel have certain options in terms of where they register to vote, so that either they can register as an ordinary voter, as an overseas voter potentially, or they can register as a service voter. And reading from the written evidence provided to the Scottish Affairs Committee from the Ministry of Defence, they say, and I quote, a service voter can register an address where they currently reside in the UK, an address where they would be living if they were not in the services, or an address where they have lived in the past. In the latter case, this could be a parent's address or a previous private or service residence. And I would go on to quote excuse me, Lord Wallace of Tancerness, the Advocate General, who in the Section 30 order debate in the House of Lords on 16th January 2013 said, and I quote, members of the armed forces will be able to vote in the referendum if they are on the register in Scotland, either as a result of an address in Scotland or a qualifying address showing a connection to Scotland, such as service accommodation in Scotland, an address in Scotland where they would be living if they were not in the services, or an address in Scotland where they have lived in the past. So, to my mind, that seems to be fairly comprehensive in terms of the options available. And I just would seek your comments on that particular issue.
It is comprehensive in terms of the range, but it depends precisely on where a service person, member of the services, will be at any time, and that range of options isn't available to all service personnel all the time. The question for when anyone feels absolutely right that there is the choice of being registered as an ordinary voter, potential to be an overseas voter, although I think the MOD, in giving evidence to the Scottish Affairs Committee, said that less than 1%, I think, were registered as overseas voters, and then through a service declaration. And on the service declaration, the question will be where someone was had residence at the time they completed the service declaration, and that could be if they were based in England. It may still be an address in Scotland if the nature of they are able to establish residence in Scotland. So they will have a choice if they're able to establish residence. The basic premise of establishing residence applies wherever someone is based in the UK. Slightly different rules for those who are based outside the UK, and it's in that situation where they can elect to go back to an address in Scotland, even if they can't prove residence. It's a fairly complicated issue.
Okay, I'm not entirely sure that really contradicts what I've quoted from both the MOD and the Advocate General, because it seems to me, reading it from the perspective, I have to say, convener in my previous life as a lawyer, I mean, it seems quite clear that there are a lot of options available if a service, a member of the services sought to register to have a vote in the independence referendum. It seems to me that actually the definition is really fairly wide, and that they would have the facility to do that, should they wish to.
It can be wide, but it will depend on the circumstance of each individual registration application. And it would be for the electoral registration officer to make a determination based on the information that is provided by the service personnel.
Working with the MOD on these matters, and we cooperate with the MOD in providing information relating to the registration options and to the date of the referendum, etc., as you would expect.
Yeah. And the MOD has unit registration officers to make sure that, and there's a campaign currently underway within the forces, and we will work with them over the next period to make sure that people properly understand the nature of their registrations. A lot of people think the service declaration, which lasts for 5 years, is a fixed declaration. That declaration can be altered and a new declaration put in. So if someone's circumstances, if they wanted to make an assessment about their circumstances, they can change the nature of their service declaration without any issue whatsoever, as long as they're able to demonstrate that link to residence.
You can just raise more general issues. I know that you submitted considered opinion to the government in regard to the initial consultation document, and now we've seen the bill as it's in its current state. Are you satisfied that the government took into consideration enough of the concerns that the Electoral Commission had raised at that time, or are there remaining concerns that you want to draw to our attention?
Well, our general issue, our headline issue, was in relation to making sure that the bill was drafted in such a way as to include all 16 and 17-year-olds. And as I said at the outset of our session, convener, we're satisfied that the bill has achieved that. That was one of our key aims. And there are one or two other issues we've raised with the government, and a number of technical issues that we hope to progress with with them as the bill passes through the parliamentary process.
Yeah, but the discussions you're having with the government are generally positive, and they're...
Yes, I think it's obviously we made a number of technical comments in January of this year on the franchise bill as it was then drafted. It's now been split in a sense, and some of the sections in relation to registration and access and supply of the register and use of the register are now in the main referendum bill, which we haven't actually got at the moment. So we've got. We are assuming that some of those comments have been taken up, but obviously until it's published, we don't know. The only thing we could comment at the moment is in terms of the policy memorandum, paragraph 18 of that talks about who will get access to the merged register, which is essentially the CCO, CO, us, the lead designated organisations, and printers and such like. One of the principles we have is there should be no barriers to campaigning, and we do note from the memorandum, if this is carried through into the bill, that other campaigners who are not the lead campaigners, by that I mean the yes and the no campaign, may not have access to all of the details of people who can vote in the referendum. And I think one of the things we would be interested in, and one of the things obviously the committee will want to know, is the reason why behind that decision, if it is indeed drafted in that way in the main referendum bill. And I think another very technical matter which we think may come up is we think the way the access arrangements will be made for the lead designate organisations, they may only get access to the merged register potentially some 10 weeks before referendum date. Now, parties in other lives we have, parties often say to us that if people change the register quite close to an electoral event, it's very difficult for us to upload the details into our software systems. And they normally talk about to us 6 weeks or so to achieve all of that. You could finish up with a situation where the lead campaigners only had a very short window in which to update their software. So one of the things we might suggest to you is that you might want to ask Scottish Government, have they thought about that? Have they sought the views of parties and the lead campaigners, or the nascent lead campaigners, on that specific point?
That's more to do with the next bill that's coming out. So.
Yeah. I mean, we're taking that from what is in the policy memorandum, but obviously the actual provisions are in the next bill.
In regard to this bill, are there any technical issues outstanding that we need to know about? Okay. Thank you. Has anybody else got any other questions they'd like to ask? Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming along this morning. I'm very grateful for you giving us your evidence. Oh, sorry, I forgot.
It's very simple.
Apologies. You're not off the hook yet.
Very briefly, this bill, of course, repeals on 1st January 2015. Would you expect the Young Voters Register to be destroyed thereafter?
Yeah. I mean, there would be. I mean, just the data protection rule would require you not to have any information that you don't need any longer. I mean, it's clearly expired, so that information would not be held. I think there's a challenge about, for EROs, having information about people who will become 17 during the life of the register. There's just something about having some information that would be useful. It may well be that when you speak to the EROs later, they've worked this one through. But there is just something about knowing you've got a cohort of people who you would, in theory, be able to move on to your main register because of their age. So there is just something there about having information that could be helpful in terms of compiling the normal register. But if the law says you no longer need it, then I think there's a potentially dilemma there.
Well, the raison d'etre for its existence has gone.
Yes,
from 1st January.
But the point I'm making is there will be information on that young person's register which will be helpful to the ERO in compiling future registers. And if that all disappears, it just means that the work is generated again.
Which is a matter for the 17-year-olds who would be attainers onto the register for the election which follows the referendum. So, but that's
But they would be picked up in the routine process for.
Yes. Well, they should be picked up in the routine process, but the evidence that's on the register is hard evidence of someone's date of birth. You would hope it would get picked up in the routine process, but there is just a risk that it wouldn't get picked up in the routine process.
But that's a matter, certainly that's a
It's
matter.
not just the crisp, succinct,
I think the
precise
clear point
answer I was looking for.
As I say, I think it should be destroyed because it's no longer required for purchase. However, there is good information in there that would help the ARO in compiling their registers in the future.
Your appendix is in or out?
Just a clarification. Who makes that decision?
It's in the other bill.
It's in the bill.
In the bill.
It's in the other bill.
In the bill.
In the other bill?
We would expect it to be in the other bill, yeah.
Right. Oh, I must have missed what you said then. So you're...
we would expect it to be destroyed.
So you don't know until the referendum bill is published?
Yeah. Right. We'd expect it to be in the bill and we'd expect it to be destroyed. There is a caveat which electoral registration officers may raise with you about having access to hard information for the general
to be
register.
destroyed. Yeah. Thank you.
This may be a question for the electoral registration officer, so forgive me if it is, but will there be sufficient time while that register is extant for an assessment to be done of how many young people who are registered actually vote?
It's not a question of timing, I don't think. It's a matter of won't be able. There'll be no marked register which shows the way that 16, 17-year-olds vote. They won't be specified, and for obvious reasons, they won't be specified. So there's no way of telling.
A way of knowing. Yeah, that was my thought.
There was provision in the earlier draft consultation bill which was circulated, which gave marks, which would allow someone to total them up to see how many ballot papers had been issued to 16 and 17-year-olds. But our understanding is that that isn't in the bill.
Correct on this occasion, and assuming that there is no one else who wishes to ask a question. Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. Grateful. Thank you.
Are you sure
It was my fault. In the meantime, we'll take a break until 10 o'clock.
Just come together, folks, so we can get on to the next session here. We're ready to go. Good morning. We're on to the second panel this morning of evidence taking in regard to the referendum franchise bill. And can I say good morning to Mary Pitcaithley, who's the convener of the Electoral Management Board, and Chris Highcock, the board secretary, is also here. Brian Byrne, who's the chair of the Electoral Registration Committee, and the Scottish Assessors Association, Kate Crawford, who's the chair of the Scottish and Northern Ireland branch of the Association of Electoral Administrators, and Bruce Robertson, OBE, who is the Education Policy Advisor for the Association of Directors of Education in Scotland. We've really got to get shorter titles in Scotland, haven't we? But welcome, folks, and very well welcome along to our proceedings this morning in the Scottish Parliament. I'm grateful for you coming and giving evidence to us. And I was going to ask Linda Fabiani if she would start off the question. Oh, sorry, apologies. Before we do that, Mary, I think you want to be a very quick statement.
If members would appreciate a very brief reminder of the status of the board, that might be quite helpful, perhaps. But as I'm sure you are all aware, the Electoral Management Board was created by the Local Electoral Administration Scotland Act of 2011, which gave the board the general function of coordinating the administration of local government elections in Scotland. The EMB consists of returning officers, some deputy returning officers and electoral registration officers. As convener, I was appointed by ministers, but the board is also very grateful for the specialist advice that we receive from professional organisations of election experts from the Scottish Government and the UK Government and from the Electoral Commission. As convener, I have a power of direction over returning officers and DROs to promote best practice in the administration of elections and to support the electoral community. The focus of the activity that we have is to ensure that the interests of the voter are at the centre of all decision-making in relation to electoral administration. Now, obviously, we're, like everybody else, awaiting the publication of the referendum bill, but we anticipate, on the basis of the Edinburgh Agreement, that the convener of the EMB will be appointed as the Chief Counting Officer for the referendum and will therefore have responsibility for ensuring the proper and effective conduct of that referendum, including the conduct of the poll and the counting of votes. This will include collating a national result, directing local counting officers, and there will be key tasks for us in relation to guidance and performance management, the process of the count, and obviously stakeholder engagement. For us, having informed stakeholders who have confidence in us is critically important. And our aim, therefore, is to have 2 electoral events in 2014. We keep forgetting about the Europeans, but there's the European elections in May, June, and also then the referendum in October, November. Those 2 events we would want to be well run, well administered, and producing results that are accepted, and by accepted I mean as accurate and correct, and that we have no barriers to voters taking part in either of those electoral events. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Is anybody else from any other organisation want to say anything to begin with? No, okay. Well, Linda, sorry, Linda.
Okay, yeah, I would just like to cover an issue that didn't come up with our first panel this morning, but that we have taken advice and opinion on from all the other panels we've had, which is the issue of child protection in relation to the 16 and 17-year-olds. I would appreciate the views of all of you on how this has been approached and whether you are confident that relevant issues have been taken into account.
I might defer to Brian in relation to this issue, but would start by saying that clearly it's a matter for government to be clear on issues relating to data protection and child protection in all of these matters. We are entering new territory, obviously, and I'm sure there is a lot of advice there available for ministers and for parliamentarians in relation to these issues, but it's certainly something which most returning officers are also local government chief executives, and obviously would have these matters very close to our hearts.
Yeah, I think there are a few things in the draft bill that are obviously aimed at child protection, not publishing the young person's register until very late in the process, and having a young person having the right to disguise their address, really. There are some issues with that clause, but it could be worked out, and these are quite good ideas. And so we shouldn't be able to give out information on the young person to credit reference or anybody buying the register. It's only used for the election, and it's only available very close to, the referendum, very close to the referendum. So By that time, everybody on the published register will be 16 within a few weeks, really, of the publication. So it reduces any issues.
And I think also we are, as EROs, used to handling sensitive material or possibly sensitive material. And we do that just now anyway with personal identifiers for postal vote applications and things. So we are quite used to handling material that needs to be dealt with in a careful manner, as with anonymous registration. That falls within our remit as well. So we do have safeguards in place, I think. Mr. Robertson.
Yes, the issue of child protection is paramount across education and children's services, and one of the things that we would want to have absolute clarity on is the use of the data once it's sourced, and we'd want to ensure that that data is used for the purpose required, and certainly the child protection dimension of it and the abuse of the data is something that we would want to ensure that just does not happen. It's a very interesting question you pose, because one normally thinks of child protection in other dimensions, but this is a good example of something that must be taken into consideration, and indeed head teachers and parents and carers would want those assurances. So it's a very important issue you raise.
Yeah, we certainly heard from the Children's Commissioner and other such people that they felt that their views had been taken on board and reflected. So it would seem that people in the field are generally satisfied at what's being achieved here. But, as Mr Robertson says, should always be vigilant. Thank you, Convener.
I think that's probably an inevitable conclusion we come to Admiral Goldie on that particular part as well.
Thanks, Convener. With the repeal of the bill, or the Act as it will become in 1st January 2015, do you agree that the register of young voters should be destroyed?
I'll try to follow what Andrew Scallon was saying. It is good information. Generally speaking, yes, it should be destroyed. If there's no other use for it, certainly be destroyed. But everybody on that register will be over 16 by then, and it would be good information to use for individual registration, to avoid having to send them all an application form to join into the full register by then, which would be on an individual basis checked against DWP. If we could, I've suggested to the Cabinet Office that if we could use the Young Persons Register as a good, robust source of voters to test against WP, it would remove the need to write to each person as an individual. However, if the child protection issues, even for 16-year-olds, were so great that we couldn't do that, then we would have to issue an application form to everyone.
Would you need some further legislative protection to let you retain the register?
Yes, we'd need legislation that would allow us to do that. The idea really is we've got these young people to join in the process. Would then be asking them again to join in the process rather than automatically continuing them.
Bruce, can I ask you, in terms of your own particular role in this as opposed to the EROs, what your view would be of this?
I think, first of all, I think the most important legacy of this, I'd like to think, is that young people in Scotland have become politically literate and understand the issues, and they take that forward as active citizens in Scotland. As far as data protection is concerned and the legal surrounds of that, we would take advice from our lawyers on it and comply with that. What I feel about that personally or professionally, in a sense, with respect to the committee, is irrelevant. It's what the legal issue is, and I think that's probably the line that educationalists would take. We must ensure that when we're working in our schools and beyond that in colleges and other institutions, that we're working within the law. So we would just comply with that. I actually think the most important legacy is actually the citizenship.
Patricia?
Just on that, perhaps to Mr Burnham and Ms Caithley, would there be a difference in age or in any other factors that might be relevant for that matter between a 16-year-old who has been on the referendum register and a 16-year-old who will be identified as an attainer on a normal register?
After well, the referendum was autumn, so after autumn we'd be beginning to think about the next canvass, and we would be trying to capture these very same people who we've already got details of.
Yeah.
And that was the issue. It's really, it seems bureaucratic to ask them for the same information that they've already given us.
And I think we'll just have to work within whatever the legislation says in that respect. But I recognise the potential benefits of it, but obviously there are potential issues as well.
Area exhausted. I'll come to James in that case to deal with issues of voter registration in general.
Okay, thank you, Convener, and good morning. You'll be aware, having looked at some of the previous evidence sessions, that one of the issues that's come up is the UK legislation to introduce individual registration as opposed to household registration. In terms of the registration for the referendum, do you have a view as to, whether it would be better to delay individual registration and use household registration for the referendum?
That depends on the date of the referendum, and there's, depending whether the referendum is fairly early, we'd suggest to the Cabinet Office that we would delay introduction of individual registration until after the referendum. If the referendum was fairly late, we would want to go early, immediately after the European elections. If the date is in the middle somewhere, in October, that causes problems, slight problems, because there's arguably not full amount of time either side, so some things might have to cross over, or electors will be getting information on two different processes at the same time, but we would try to keep that to a minimum.
But just, obviously, we'll know the date in a few hours' time, but let's just assume that the date is in the autumn of 2014, it's October. What approach would you look to take, or what would be your preferred approach in terms of household registration?
Well, I would prefer we'd start the individual registration process 1st of November, or as soon.
If the date of the referendum was October, you would prefer individual registration was delayed until after that?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. In terms of getting 16 and 17-year-olds registered, obviously you'll use the annual canvass. Are there any other techniques that you'll use to identify potential 16 and 17-year-olds?
Well, we should be able to get information from direct education departments. We do at the moment for young attainers. We would hopefully be able to extend that, and the bill mentions that the same rules would apply. We would be able to then pre-populate the canvass forms, and that's certainly something that the bill seems to encourage. We would have the information of where the 16-year-olds live and who they are. We would just need them to confirm that's still the case, or somebody in the household to confirm that. That would get them onto the young person's register. If they weren't confirmed, we would follow up where we thought there was a young person there. But ultimately, if the person doesn't engage, we would remove the name from a database, and they wouldn't be registered.
Would that cover, say, 15-year-olds who were going to be 16 at the time of the referendum, and there are no legal obstacles to that?
I don't see a legal obstacle. It doesn't seem to be a legal difference between 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds, but I understand you're extending the child protection issues by trying to capture 14-year-olds. So that would only need to be the case if the canvass was more than a year before the referendum date. So again, the referendum date is quite important to work that out. But we would imagine that we'd be looking for 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds for the register.
Okay, and just on a slightly related issue, Convener, if I could, in terms of organisation for the poll, obviously we want to get as many 16 and 17-year-olds registered as possible, and then get them to actually vote and hopefully enjoy the voter experience. What do you think needs to be done in terms of polling place arrangements to ensure that they're smooth for people 16 and 17-year-olds voting for the first time, and also quite a lot of the there'll be a large number of the general population probably voting for the first time in this referendum.
Yes, I think it's very important that all voters are able to vote if they wish to vote, having registered and they turn up on the day, having decided perhaps not to use proxy votes or postal voting. So if they turn up at the polling place on the day, which is what you're asking about, we would want to see all voters from 16 to 106 being able to vote if that was what they wanted to do, and that we try as far as possible to remove any possible barriers to that. So we have been discussing with the local government committee the whole issue of access to polling stations, language used, etc. So all of that's an issue that we're constantly having to consider. Whether or not there's extra and different messages for 16 and 17-year-olds, I think we see it to be looked at. From my point of view, once they're on the register, they're voters, potential voters, and we should be trying to make it as easy as possible for them to actually cast their vote. Now, that could involve physical access to polling places, it could involve the use of signage, it could involve perhaps information officers in the polling station, which we've used in previous elections, for example, or it could involve a whole range of these things all together to try to make it as easy as possible for people to actually enjoy the voter experience.
Also, local authorities work very closely with the Electoral Commission and their public awareness exercises that they were explaining early on in their evidence. So they are focused to ensure that as many people as possible are both aware of the electoral event, that they need to, what they need to do to take part, and then how to take part. So we'll continue that exercise across local authorities in Scotland. Our other concern would be consistency nationally, to make sure that the same experience is apparent to the voter wherever they are in the country, but also whatever age group or sector of the population they're drawn from.
Bearing in mind that the number of people that will participate in this referendum is likely to be higher than a normal election, have you made any assessment of the need to extend polling stations and also polling places within polling stations?
I think across the country my colleagues are looking at those issues. Do we need more polling places? Should we have more staff on them so that we avoid any possibility of queuing, for example, particularly at the close of poll, which I know was an issue that members are interested in. Should we have more staff involved, during the day or at peak periods, for example? So all of those things will be issues that we'll look at. It may be, for example, that as Chief Counting Officer, the person responsible may decide to direct counting officers locally as to an appropriate number of voters beyond which it would not be reasonable to have more than that going into any particular polling place. So that was done in the AV referendum, for example. There was clear guidance about not having polling places with more than a certain number of electors.
I'm going to come Patrick Harvey in a moment, but just let me bore down into an issue which James rightly raised with you, and that's regarding the 14-year-old issue. Only a potential at this stage. I realise that it's all dependent upon the bill, but of course the forum, which goes out in Schedule 2, refers only to 15-year-olds at this stage. So you would expect, depending on the date of the referendum, that potential might need to be adjusted, and it's really what you're saying, I think.
Yes. So, yes. If there was more than if canvassing happened more than a year before the referendum date, then there would be very few 14-year-olds would be asked to complete it. However, we've had discussions with Scottish Government officials about practicalities, and there may be ways around that so that we don't capture someone we don't need to capture the 14-year-old while they're 14. We can perhaps wait until they're 15.
But effectively, the referendum, if we find out this afternoon that the referendum is before the 1st of November, there shouldn't be an issue. Have I got that right?
Yes, that's okay. Pretty well, yeah.
If I don't know anything, I can assure you. I have tried very hard to find out, but I know nothing. I think I'll move on very quickly. Patrick Harvey.
Happy to give you cover, convener, anytime. Still on this question about the registration process and how that feels for young people, and also the information that's communicated about what it means, about what registration actually means. Because I'm thinking if I was 15 or 16 looking to register, going to be a voter at 16 for the first time, And at one point, everybody's telling me it's really important to register, it's really important to vote. And I go along or fill in the form or whatever, and I get registered. And then I find out for myself, without somebody telling me, that first of all, in May or June, I can't get a vote. And then 4 months later, I can get a vote. And then 6 months later, again, I can't get a vote. And nobody's explained why. That could be pretty dispiriting. And you know, disillusionment could set in with that. Could I ask how you're thinking about how the registration process itself will explain why that's the case and that it's the case?
Well, I work for Renfrewshire Valuation Joint Board. I'm the Deputy ERO there. And for some years now, we've been running schemes in partnership with our local schools, our local secondary schools. And we aim to speak to every sixth-year pupil where the head teacher has given us permission to go into the school. And this, obviously, we've run the workshop. It's based on some really good resourcing that was issued by the Electoral Commission some years ago called the Democracy Cookbook. And we run workshops and we explain the voting process. We ask them to build a politician. We hold a mock election. The teams, they build a politician, yes. Well, I could have, but you might not like some of them. But basically, we're trying to get the young people to engage in, you know, what does politics mean for them, and what do they expect from the politicians, and what would the top 3 qualities they would like to see in a politician. And then they have a budget to spend on a local project, and at the end of that process, they stand up and do a party political broadcast, and the team who wins gets a wonderful prize. Sorry?
Gets to run the country.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. But interestingly enough, when we do that process, we get about 83% of the students we talk to registering after that. And of those, we ask the question at the end of the evaluation form, are you more likely to use your vote because of this? And that sits around the 70% that they are. Some of the comments that they've given back to us have said the reasons not to vote are they don't feel engaged, they don't feel anybody really addresses youth issues, that politicians and politics are beyond their remit. They're not engaging with youth in general. But we asked them, how would you encourage people to vote if you had the choice? And they said, make elections more exciting. Make them available online and through, you know, they don't understand why they can't vote on their phone. They think that's an obvious one and they don't understand why not. And they have also said that they need more workshops like the ones we run. They need more education. Now, I know there are people around the country who do similar things to this. But what we're trying to do now in the last few months is explain to them that you'll be voting in this one, you won't, and as you said, you won't be voting in the next, and etc. And there is this confusion, but we're trying to get that message over to them just now and saying that the referendums are possibly a one-off, but something that they should be aware of. And they are not happy at being given the franchise in one and not in the other. They don't understand why that's happening. So I think it's a huge education problem, you know, literally having to, not for the education authorities necessarily, but for everyone to engage, that we make sure that young people do understand what's being taken on. And the Electoral Commission are usually very good at giving resources to help get that message over.
Okay, Bruce, I think you wanted to come in as well.
I'd just like to follow that up, because there are some very good examples of excellent practice across the country, and I think one of the things we need to do here is, you know, the key agencies must work in a coordinated fashion on this, so that, you know, what happens in Renfrewshire should happen elsewhere in terms of a good practice. So I think we'd like to actually assure you today that that's what we'll be doing. And that youngsters, no matter where they are, or indeed in terms of Rob Gibson's question, no matter what their native language is, that they can access this. There are 2 dimensions to it, I feel. One is to ensure that we can encourage all 16 and 17-year-olds to place themselves in a position so that they can discharge their legal rights, citizens. Yeah. So that's working with our EROs and the Electoral Commission to make sure they understand the process. Yeah. The second dimension, obviously, is to encourage them to engage in the debate, to understand the issues. I used the phrase, for me, it's about political literacy. They need to understand what the issues are to make a fair, balanced judgment on that. Now, where you live, whether it's in Helensburgh or Helmsdale, it shouldn't make any difference. So I think what we need to do as national agencies, and also working with the likes of Education Scotland, is to ensure that educators, and I use that word carefully, not just teachers, but educators, those who are working with young people, for example, in different youth groups and so on, that educators actually are working to the same set of standards and approaches, and so that there are no mixed messages. The coordinated approach using best practice.
You've got a supplementary.
Just to quickly follow up on that, does that imply that we won't be facing a situation that Kate Crawford just described, where good work, good activity can only happen in schools where the head teacher chooses to let people in? Will it be very clear to all schools what is expected of them?
Yeah. Yes, there'll be clear guidance established on that, and that's, in fact, I have a meeting with the Directors of Education on Monday. We've got this on our agenda. We need to establish very clear guidance so that the young people, the parents and carers, and indeed the educators understand what the rules of engagement, if you like. It shouldn't be down to, if you like, the whim of an individual.
And will that guidance be publicly available and consulted on?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think I've got a number of supplementaries in this area. I think Rob Gibson had a supplementary, so does Stuart McMillan and Animal Goldie.
Yeah, I'd like to tease out the question of from Helensburgh to Helmsdale slightly further, because, how can directors of education ensure that every school has the opportunity to provide balanced materials to promote informed discussion in PSE and modern studies, particularly on this referendum?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into technicalities of the curriculum, but not every school, for example, does offer modern studies. So we need to ensure that through the curriculum of every secondary school there are these opportunities. And that's where, in working in collaboration across the 32 education authorities with School Leaders Scotland, which is, if you like, the association for the secondary head teachers, we come to a very, very clear set of understandings as to what's happened. I mean, we cannot be placed in a situation where, one set of children in Helensburgh are actually getting a very different opportunity to engage in this from a group, for example, in Helmsdale. I think that's got to be something we would all want to aspire to.
I think you wanted to come in as well.
Convener, I just wanted to reassure members that, wearing my Chief Executive hat for a minute, that would be a matter of concern for Council Chief Executives as well. We would want to be very clear that, if there is guidance available, that's being used by schools and that guidance has been consulted upon. There is an awareness of what's being said and that schools are expected to make use of that material. So that would be something that we could support our colleague Directors of Education to take forward.
Stuart McMillan and then Annabel Goldie.
Thank you, Convener. Just it's following on from kind of that line of questioning. I think an 83% increase is exceptional. Obviously, that was for 6 years. But going forward, regarding the referendum, could that type of activity actually take place for the 4th and 6th years as well? Bearing in mind, obviously, 4th years, they are still compelled to be at school, whereas 6 years aren't. But certainly beyond the referendum, could it be something could be rolled out to, basically for folk in first year onwards as well?
I mean, well, I know in our own case, it's simply a resourcing issue that we don't do it further down the school, because we have the number of schools we have in the joint board area. We can manage the secondary schools and we can manage 6th year pupils. Our aim would be to roll it down further. Obviously, next year, from this year onwards, in fact, we're extending it. So we're saying that it's for the younger pupils, obviously the pupils that will be caught within the referendum age. The resourcing of that is the biggest issue. And I also think it's for all pupils. It's not just for pupils that study modern studies, because in actual fact, my own children all studied modern studies, and I know that they had an awareness of the voting system and their rights and responsibilities, etc. So I've always said to the head teachers when I've written out, this is not for modern studies pupils, this is for if we could hijack your PSE period and use it for that, so that I'm getting the message to as many of the pupils as possible.
I mean, just following on from that, Camilla. I mean, that's the thing also. I mean, in terms of the referendum next year, it's a huge event, irrespective of which way people vote, irrespective of their thoughts or opinions. It's a huge event, and certainly younger people are engaged now, just as much as people who are 18 plus. So it's a huge opportunity, and it certainly would be a shame for that not to be fully taken advantage of. For younger people. And just one other point to that, one of the things that this Parliament does, and it does it very well, is in terms of engagement with schools, whether it's the MSPs going out to schools or whether it's schools coming into the Parliament. And I think that's something that I think we all appreciate, but also I think it's something that schools certainly do appreciate, and they take that on board and try to work with the Parliament on it as well to improve things too.
Absolutely, yeah.
That takes us down. We'll go there, I think.
Thanks, Convener. Our panel of young witnesses whom we had last week accepted that in the dissemination of information, a balance had to be struck between providing information and not distracting from essential activity within the school at what may be a critical period for examinations. How do you get that balance right?
That's interesting that they said that to you, and it's really important, incidentally, through the development of this journey, if you like, that we do continue to ask young people their views on key issues. Most of the young people that will be involved in this will be in the senior phase of Curriculum for Excellence, looking at national qualifications, and it is very important that there is no disproportionate amount of time given to this. Within the senior phase, however, that there are, if you like, parts of the curriculum and parts of the pupil week where in fact they are not solely focused on qualifications, and it's in the kind of PSE classes that you've just heard that these sort of activities would take place. And actually from them there are spin-offs into the more formal aspects of the curriculum and some of the qualifications as well. And that's the happy balance we need to strike, and I'd like to leave you with that confidence that we'll not tilt the balance, because that would be unfair on the young folk.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Leader, and good morning, and thank you all for coming. It was just sort of following on from that in terms of our session last week with representatives from former members of the Youth Parliament, representatives from Young Scot and from the National Union of Students. And a point that came across quite clearly was that they were all very keen to have their respective organisations involved in helping with awareness raising. And I just wonder what sort of role you could foresee, because they're very, very willing to get involved. And I think it would help deal with one of the points that Kate Crawford raised about engaging with young people in a way that they find of interest to them, and that perhaps is certainly more easily done by young people themselves. So I just wonder what your thoughts on that might be.
Well, I could perhaps make reference back to John McCormick's reference to the communications network that we have, which currently works very well with the communications team within the Electoral Commission, but which I think could have a role beyond that in terms of talking to those representative groups of young people about what they would find useful and valuable. So one of the things I'll do when I go back to the office is speak to my communications manager, who is an active member of that network, as would be the communications staff from Edinburgh as well. So just really to see, could they make contact with the witnesses you spoke to last week and see if they can take forward some innovative thinking around this area. But it's a very interesting question. We are, as I think was said in the previous session, having to do things differently perhaps for a different generation, but we can't get beyond the overall message, which is that we need to be reaching out to all voters.
Thank you.
Chair, sorry, a unique opportunity for Youth Link Scotland, which is an overarching umbrella body to play an important coordinating role there. For me, that would be really crucial. But obviously, we have the Youth Parliament, with Highland Youth Voice, and so on and so forth. And they'll be desperate to engage with this process for sure. So I think it's actually managing it might be the issue, Chair.
Thank you.
Very positive perspective. I like that. In terms of the general issues of the bill, and obviously you were involved in the consultation with the government following the publication of the initial consultation process, and we see where the bill is now. Is there anything in the bill that you want to draw attention to that you think might be useful for us to hear?
The thing about I think it says in the bill at the moment no application may be made before 1st of December. That could be quite a serious limitation.
Tell me a bit more about that. Explain to the committee about what that means.
It says in the bill that no application to go on the register, the young person's register, may be made before 1st December. Now we're discussing how that would work, but we would be likely to want to start canvassing on 1st of October, so it leaves a little bit of gap there, and so that's an issue. I'm sure it can be resolved, but there is a gap at the moment, and I think it comes from the original idea for individual registration would be that wouldn't start until 1st of December.
Yeah. Good point. Okay, that's very helpful. Okay. Well, in that case, can I thank you all very much for coming along and giving us your evidence this morning. I'm very grateful to you for giving us your time and coming along to the Scottish Parliament. And I'll just bash on to the next part of the agenda, where you folks are making your way from the witness positions. And the next part of the agenda is in regard to item 2, which is the approach paper. The aim of this item is to agree an approach to the consideration of the independence referendum bill itself, which, as we know from our emails, if we've seen them this morning, it's due to be now introduced sometime today. Can I firstly invite the committee to consider the call for evidence written set out in the Annex A, and invite any comments in regard to that. The list of issues on which evidence is invited is at the bottom of page 5 of the paper and the top of page 6. And the proposed deadline for submissions is the 6th of June. So in regard to Annex A, is any comments? If there are no comments, I'm going to bash on to the next bit, and it's just assume that's accepted in terms of the recommendations made. And secondly, invite the committee to consider the issues to do with witnesses. The paper explains that it will be possible to accommodate 8 panels of witnesses during our meetings in May. And 1 or 2 more panels could be included if needed. And the timetables on Annex B, are we content with what's laid out there? Obviously, there's a bit of work for the clerks to do. We don't need to finally agree that today, but if we're happy with the general approach, then we can ask the clerks to go and work up something a bit more definitive. Okay, with that being said, in that case, I formally, before I do that, I need to actually get your permission to approve any witness expenses claims for today's purposes. Is that's okay? Okay, I formally close the meeting on this occasion. Thank you, colleagues.